Hello everybody, it's our Sunday morning service and Wayne and Lisa with you for the next hour. It's good to have your company wherever you're listening to us across New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. Morning Lisa, how you going?
Really good, Wayne. Enjoying the fact we're on the Sunday service.
And you're up and about and at it. Today a couple of cups of tea and you're on the way.
I certainly am, and nice to be able to keep a bit warm too by the fire.
Isn't it good here in the studio though? We've got the terrific facilities here at the Flow Media Centre where we can get a cup of tea and a bicky too. And not allowed to have a bicky though until after the Sunday service because we've got a special guest today.
We certainly do. It's going to be good to be able to have a chat to Mark Sexton from the Catholic Church in the Barossa Valley.
Yeah, and he's a local minister and he's very much with his work with COVID-19. With the lack of ministers that are available right now for people to have marriages and births, christenings, all those sorts of things that you take for granted that the church is there to do, but maybe the church has not got a number of workers that it needs, and we're going to have a look at that as a topic of discussion today.
And it's certainly a little bit more on the reflection of how we are to love others and to pour ourselves out for others, but unfortunately we need a lot more workers.
Yeah, we do. The harvest is plentiful. There are not enough workers. Mark Sexton is our guest. He's along in just a moment here on the Sunday service. Welcome back to Sunday service here on Sunday morning on Flow. It's good to be with you today. We have a special guest, as we mentioned earlier, and he's from one of our local congregations in the Barossa Valley. Mark Sexton is one of the priests in this local region, and he's been good enough to come in and join us this morning. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Good day. I'm pretty all right.
Good to have you with us.
You're not in the vineyards there, Mark.
Well, not physically, no.
As a minister in a country town, when those census results come out, I thought we'd have a bit of a chat about it because I know we've talked off air before we've discussed on air this, but were you a bit surprised at the number of people that had not identified with the Christian faith when the census detail came out? Or as a minister of a church, does that not surprise you?
I wasn't really surprised because with the change in the census form, the way it was set out, I was expecting something like that, not to the degree that it was. But it's also the case that, it's been a long-term thing. The numbers at churches have been dropping since just after the First World War. The Catholics didn't really start dropping till the 70s and 80s. So it's been a long-term coming. I noticed that this drop in identifying as a member of faith, it's actually restricted only to the first world. In every other continent, the number of people who are, I can only speak from the Catholics, becoming Catholic is increasing. In the last 100 years, there's been a 16,000% increase in the number of people identifying as Catholic in sub-Saharan Africa.
In that place alone.
Just in Africa alone, yeah.
I heard one of the other speakers from one of the Christian groups saying that they had observed in South America, in Asia, a massive growth in the Christian church. So to put this in its perspective, the West is seeing a decline and that's obviously having an impact. I think maybe traditionally we've thought about that in our country regions and we still held to faith and that, those statistics might be for the nation, but I'm sure there's more Christian folk in our country communities. But I think that may be an illusion and it may be that we are seeing a lack of attendance to services. Have you noted that in your pastoral care and in your pastoral work in the Barossa or in other locations?
Well, in all the 8 churches, yeah, because, of course, particularly in country towns, the church used to be the community gathering place. Yeah, it's where you made friends, you met friends, where you met your spouses. And there was less to do. But now, when you've got the sport on Sunday, if the parents bring their kids to church on Sunday, then the kids miss out on bonding with their friends at netball or football. As I told the AFLW in Barossa and Kapunda and such, they play Sunday mornings. Yeah. So if they bring the kids to church, they're removing the kids from
their connections with social activities.
Yeah. So that's part of the problem, I think. An element, I think, too, is that people assume the church will be there when they want it. And so they don't think, in some cases, that I don't need to turn up because it'll be there when I need it.
Okay.
That may be unfair on some people.
So how long have you been actually in the Barossa, Mark? Have you been, I mean, it's a very different demographic, isn't it, in terms of the opportunities there in the country regions?
Well, I've been up, as of the 1st of August this year, I will have been up Barossa and Kapunda for 15 years.
Right.
Wow.
And you're not planning to leave too soon?
It depends on what the Archbishop decides.
Yes. I was going to ask you about numbers then. Is another problem that we may not have as many churches with a trained worker in them? Even we're seeing Christian chaplains go out into schools and into sporting groups to make up for what effectively quite often is a lack of a reverend or a priest of some sort within that community. Some of our country regions where we broadcast actually don't have a minister of any particular brand in their town. So is that a reason why we may be seeing a drop in the number of people who identify as Christian, because we don't have Christian workers as much as we used to?
Very probably. I mean, it's the old thing. If you haven't got the role model, you're not going to think about it. And I try and cover 8 separate communities.
That's a lot of communities. So can you name them?
Oh, yeah.
How many are there?
Barossa Valley, Freeling, Kapunda, Tarlee, Hamley Bridge, Malala, Balaclava, Port Wakefield.
That's incredible.
So it's physically impossible for me to be a full-time presence in any one of those.
Right.
Without depriving the rest.
Yes.
So that's the difficulty.
So what's mainly your role when you go out to those communities? What would it be to do with perhaps people who are grieving or have got loss, or what would be your role?
There's an element of that. There's preparing people for and their families for baptisms, for weddings. There's celebrating Sunday Eucharist. There's an element, I was about to say, there's also an opportunity there for the ordinary members of the community to step up and take on ministry.
But they need mentoring,
don't they? They need mentoring, they need training.
Discipleship and
so of course,
forth.
The trouble with that is, at the moment, South Australia being South Australia, everything happens in town.
Yeah.
And sometimes it happens at night. And if you're working, you've got a family. I remember one member of our community was being asked to come on to the parish council at the time, and he was working down at Port Adelaide, and he said, I don't drive home to go to another meeting.
That's it.
I thought entirely logical to me. I mean, he had a young family.
Yeah.
The family should be coming first.
It's sort of the balance, isn't it?
I want to ask about the training in the country towns. So we don't have any seminaries in country towns. I'm led to believe in your faith group that there isn't even a seminary now in Adelaide, that training has to occur in either Melbourne or Sydney or overseas. Is that some of the reasoning behind maybe the lack of nearness, that maybe the old days where we had so many people lining up maybe to take leadership roles within the life of the church? That's no longer the case, and now when we want to train somebody, we have to send them somewhere else, and quite often that means they don't come back.
Well, they actually shut the seminary when I finished. I was the last one, as I said. At the moment, I'm the last Catholic priest in South Australia to have trained in South Australia.
Oh, really?
I hope I'm not going to be the last.
No.
But one of the things is, if you go to, it's actually cheaper to send them to Melbourne, Sydney or to Rome than to train them here.
Really?
Because of the numbers involved. And that has, that's got an opportunity getting into the wider church. The flip side of that is you're not so aware of your own local community. You get cut away. But of course they do come back, because in the Catholic tradition you're ordained for a specific community.
Yes.
Not just, you're ordained to go and find one. And so you're sponsored by your community.
It's like a calling, isn't it?
Very much a calling.
Yeah.
And so, within the Catholic tradition you have religious orders. And they're men and women called to a particular charism. And I never felt a calling to join one of the orders. I always felt a calling to be a minister within my own
local community.
I want to ask about, you mentioned some of the things you do in the ministry, but Lisa touched on things like grief and loss, and obviously we've had 2 years of a significant health impact. You, as a minister, haven't had much time off in this last 3 years.
It would have been very difficult with COVID-19.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to put another question to you, Mark. Have we got a group of people who are leading churches who are pretty exhausted and there aren't enough troops kind of in behind to help them?
In many cases, I think that's exactly the case. The closest thing I've had to a break since September of 2019 was 19 days on Kangaroo Island after the bushfires.
Oh.
And you were there probably in a ministerial role.
Yeah, as a padre with the bushfire assist.
Yes.
So that's the closest thing I've had to a proper break. So quite frankly, I can see sometimes I'm just completely emotionally flat. And there's been days where I just sit in my little cave.
Wow.
And I suppose that's the essence of you having the same struggle in a way, leading your congregation and congregations plural, and the sense of calling out to God to give you the strength and resources to continue to do what you've been called to do. I'm going to come back in a moment with Mark Sexton, who's a priest from the local church. We're talking to him today on our Sunday service about some of the demands and also some of the issues that are happening within the Christian church. I think what we might do is we'll come back and have a talk about, Mark's just expressed just the burnt outness and the stretching nature of ministry. I'm going to have a chat about just on the other side, how folk are really going through some of the crises that we've been through. This is the Sunday service. Well, welcome back. It's great to be with you. Thanks for joining us, whether you're in New South Wales, South Australia or Victoria. The Sunday service, it provides some spiritual input to which I know Lisa's got some verses ready to roll on love, and we're going to have a look at them a bit later in our service. And Mark, I'm really concerned about hearing about some of the stretching nature that people are going through. They don't have to even be members of a church. They could be folk that are next on neighbours. Have you seen in your ministry work the call into circumstances, quite devastating situations in this past period of time? Or crisis care, fires you mentioned earlier on Kangaroo Island, but is there more of that than ever before happening?
I don't think so. I think it might feel that way, but I don't think it has. And I mean, one of the issues with COVID is with all the lockdowns, there's people have been in the nursing homes and you've not been able to go and see them.
Communicate, that's right.
They're
isolated. Yeah,
there were whole months where we couldn't go in, or we could go in but we couldn't give them communion. And for Catholics particularly, that's really important to be able to receive communion. Or I could go and I could do a service, but I was not allowed to give them communion.
Not even do that.
Yeah, or I could, but only if they went back to their rooms and I went to each room individually.
Oh dear.
Incredible.
So that isolation has been a major problem. And I lost my aunt, my mother's sister. She was actually the last of her family generation to go in Victoria. And of course, so it's the only family member I've not been able to do a funeral for.
Oh, how awful.
Yeah.
Because I think they were only allowed 4 or 5 people in the chapel and the funeral home.
And has that affected a lot of ministers? You are like in the ecumenical ministry movement, you talk to other ministers. Did they find the same, that they had family members or close friendships that they simply were not able to perform a really important part of their ministry, which is to get alongside the families of grieving ones and to lay to rest somebody who has either been a member of that congregation or a friend of somebody within that congregation?
Yeah, well, very much. And I mean, I had one long-time parishioner who went, and that was when we were only allowed 10 people, including the undertakers.
Really?
And so it ended up there was only just 4 people there.
Only 4?
Who could, the family said, well, who do we not invite?
Oh, no.
Because there would have been so many, he'd been in the community for a while, there would have been a lot of people wanted to farewell him. Yeah. And of course you couldn't.
No.
And then, with the restrictions, you couldn't go into somebody's home to minister to them as well.
Very limited, isn't it?
Yeah. So it was when they made their decisions, I don't know if they'd really thought about the spirituality involved. I know in the UK, when they had their restrictions, a lot of the Catholics, the priests celebrated Mass in the churches and they streamed it out. I mean, I did that on Facebook for the parish. But the Anglicans in the UK, their bishops told them, don't even go into your churches to do it. You have to do it from home. So you've got these massive big churches and there's going to be one person there and you couldn't use it. But
how did you go? And I mean, this is a direct question from a monetary point of view, but did churches, because of the lack of people coming into the actual church building, did they then not have an offering or support from the local parish, if you like, to then enable them to keep the electricity bills and so forth going? Has that been difficult across your churches?
I can't speak for the others, but we're 30,000 in the red this year.
Wow.
And you contributed really to the fact that we've had to be isolated?
Yeah, that's a large part of it. People just forgetting to come, or when they do come, they haven't got cash on them. You know. So we've been encouraging people to go to direct debit and EFT, but and a lot of people haven't gone back into the habit of going.
No.
So where we were breaking even up until 2019, we're increasingly in the red and will be for the next few years.
So with the response to COVID, how would you have preferred to see it, Mark? You know, you're saying, like, obviously you would have liked to have been able to get more access to people that are grieving and also seriously ill. It doesn't make sense that on one hand, in the name of protecting people, that we can't actually have access. But as you said, you have to consider the spiritual wellness as well. And that has a whole holistic approach to actually medical care, isn't it?
Well, like it should be.
Body, mind, spirit, soul, the whole area, the physical as well. So we're talking about the whole realm of the body. And sometimes that can be very, very sad and devastating for families that they can't actually access their loved ones. And that can be terrifying to think that you could be passing away without your loved one around.
Yeah, and it did happen. And I don't know what the whole answer would have been. Yeah. But I think the people who made the decisions didn't think about the spirituality or the spiritual side. I remember I had one baptism, and the family of the child, they live in the south of Adelaide, but the mother's grandmother is in the Barossa Valley in a nursing home there. And so they came up to Nuruyutpa so they could, their grandmother could potentially attend. Yeah, she couldn't. What they eventually had to do was take the child to the nursing home so she could see the child through the window. Yeah. And that was it. They couldn't even weren't even allowed into the home because of the restrictions.
And praying for a person at their last is a significant thing. Ministers priests are regularly called by family for that. Were circumstances such where you were unable to do that, where you were, or people didn't call upon you because they couldn't? Did you feel like a real significant loss there as a person of faith who wants to, where somebody is at their last? That is a very poignant moment for a lot of people.
It varied from facility to facility. Yeah. Some, if you were a minister of religion coming in, and when it was the last hours, they were a bit more flexible.
Yes.
But some would not count you, as when it was like you're only allowed 2 visitors for the whole day. Some wouldn't count you if you came in as a minister, but some did. And in some cases, we didn't go into some facilities because you're only allowed 2 visitors for the whole day. We didn't want to go in and then potentially deprive a family member of being able to visit.
So you had to be decisive about who and how. It's terrible, very strategising.
And it was said every venue was slightly different.
Yes.
And you wouldn't necessarily know till you got there.
It kind of flies in the face of what Jesus would do because, when you think about how Jesus would go to lepers and touch them, there was no restrictions there, was there?
I do remember when Princess Diana went into the communities, particularly in Africa, and she went up and touched people who had illness and sickness. And at the time, we all said, well, that's what we should do. We shouldn't have these barriers.
She was really honoured for that.
Yeah, and she was. But now, with this last 2 years, we actually haven't had that, have we? We were blocked from having that connection and even that ability to be able to talk to somebody via like a mask on your face, the barrier that actually brought. We're talking to Mark Sexton, priest in the Barossa Valley, and we're having a look at some of the issues of pastoral care and ministry. But Matthew 9:35 to 38, I've got up on screen there for you in front of you. And Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the labourers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into his harvest." Is that one of your prayers?
That's one of them,
Yeah, thought so.
But, and try and encourage people that it's not about them being worthy, or whatever. It's about just being willing. Yeah. God works with who you are and what you are.
Being available.
It's like the feeding of the 5,000, where they say, "Oh, look, we can't do it, and Jesus says, just do what you can, and it turns out to be more than they need.
So how does that look to you, Mark, practically? How do you perceive that? Would you like it if you had more congregational members coming in and going out and doing that kind of thing? Or?
Oh, I'd love it. Because the more that come in, the more they can see the model, and they can see that they can reach out to each other.
Yeah.
And the old saying about many hands make light work.
Yes.
It's less pressure on any one individual.
Chaplaincy actually was a origin of the Catholic Church. What would you perceive now in terms of chaplaincy? What do you think could be the need in the future with education and everything that's going on right now? How do you perceive that chaplaincy could be a part of all that?
Oh, it's vital. I think it's vital. I can remember talking to diggers in Afghanistan who were not necessarily any religion whatsoever, but even diggers here, they really value the chaplain being there. And the same in the schools. The value of the chaplain is you don't have to make an appointment to see them. They're wandering about.
They're available.
They're available.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a judgment call on you. I mean, you go and see the psych or the shrink or the counsellor.
That's right.
There's, what's going on? But the chaplain's there.
Yeah.
It's really a neutral person, isn't it?
Exactly.
A neuter.
Yeah.
Come alongside in a way, and that's the role of the Barnabas person, isn't it? To be the support person, the one that comes alongside and helps. I'm talking this morning, Lisa and I have the privilege of having Mark Sexton with us from the local church. We're coming back, and a small lesson today with Mark about reaching out and what God's love can do in people's lives. That's coming your way here on the Sunday service. We're on the Sunday service today. We have local priest from the local congregation in the Barossa Valley, Mark Sexton. And Mark, I note that there's a passage of scripture that you would know and have recited, I would have thought, a few times in your tour of duty. Greater love has no one than this, than one to lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13, the words of Jesus. You mentioned before that you went to Afghanistan, and if it's okay, do you mind if we ask you a few little questions about that time and I guess what it's like to love in a very unlovely place? Is that okay?
That's fine, yeah.
So, tour of duty, what happened? How did you get the call up as a minister?
Well, I'm also a defence chaplain, and the military bishop came to me because we'd just sent a Catholic padre there and asked if I would go. And I checked my archbishop was okay, and he was. And so, I had been thinking about it because I knew that we had our greatest deployments since World War II.
Yes.
And I thought, well, there's a strong possibility that I might get asked to go. And so I'd reflected on it, and I thought, well, I want to go.
And you knew the risks involved as well? You knew all about what it was going to mean or cost?
Smiling now, everybody who can't actually physically hear. You can hear us, but you can't see us. Your smile's still on your face.
As I pointed out to my mother, statistically, I was safer over there than I would be on the roads in South Australia.
Yes.
Okay.
Didn't really go down well.
No. When you got on the plane, I guess it was a military aircraft. I don't know if we can ask the detail of landing there.
You have to be careful.
But if I can say, you landed there, you immediately began ministry amongst folk. What did that entail? Is it individual one-on-one, or did you have to do a service for
Well,
folk?
I would do a service every evening.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I would also do a Saturday evening and a Sunday morning service. The main role is, as I put it, to be a listening heart.
Yes.
Just walk. And I would always have a pocket full of lollies. And the parishioners were great in keeping me resupplied with Tim Tams and Minties. And one of them.
Did you put on weight over there?
No. Probably the best condition I've ever been in.
Yeah.
But especially when I first got there, they didn't know me from a bar of soap.
No.
And so I'd go in and
Were you the first chaplain over there?
I was the second Catholic chaplain.
Right, so they were quite responsive to you.
Oh,
They
yeah.
knew
My
what
predecessor
your
was
position
really good.
Yes.
And built up a good rapport with the
Well, that might have been a bit difficult for
medical
you to
people.
come back in and to try to keep that sort of connection.
And the Special Forces chaplain was we became very good friends. And I'd go in and I'd offer them a sweet. And one of the Americans once said, "Oh, you arsies, you got the greatest candies." I said, "No, mate, we don't have candies. We have lollies." And that broke the ice.
Yes.
And then suddenly they're talking with you, not to you.
To you.
Yeah.
And my routine would be after the update brief, I'd go to the hospital and just let the staff talk to me, because we saw way too many children in that hospital.
Oh, dear.
Yeah,
And then,
I'm noting that you've got a misty eyes there. You've done that a few times while you're talking about Afghanistan.
Then when they had what was called the complex attack in Tarankot, TK, in early July, I think myself and the Special Forces chaplain, I think we were in there for 8 hours.
Yeah.
He would go in, because he'd done some time in an A&E in the UK. He went into the surgery areas. I was in the triage area. And I noticed one of the Singaporean nurses said to me afterwards that they didn't have chaplains, but he found it quite reassuring to see me about the place. And one of my things was I just kept stocking up the fridge with water.
Yes.
And taking water to the doctors and the nurses.
Practical needs.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there was one bit where one of the Americans and somehow they hadn't taken his rifle off him.
Right.
And so I had to sort of very carefully get the
Dismantle
rifle away from him
weapon
and unload it, because we didn't know what might be going on, and we had to be wearing body armour. It was 42 degrees.
Were you given a drill or a brief of how to protect yourself in a situation?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, we were fairly well protected because we had the body armour, we had the blast glasses, we had the helmets.
Yes.
So we were pretty right.
How quickly did you think that you established rapport with those soldiers? How do you believe that, do you think that God really helped you in that situation?
Oh, yeah. I said I would just wander around and I'd chat. So there'd be the people at the hospital, the people in various establishments, including the detention centre, where I actually spoke to the MPs, which generally a lot of people don't like speaking to the military police, but I'd go and chat with them as well and just see how things were and let them talk. And that was the main thing, just let them speak.
Have you had to, since that time, do further follow-up when you talk about some of those soldiers that are now decommissioned from that? Has there been connection since that time?
Well, the Special Forces chaplain, so became a friend, and another soldier, we became quite good friends, although we haven't actually been able to meet up since 2000, since we got back, but we keep in contact. And she regularly reads my homilies where she is.
Yes.
So some of those there, but given there's been such a deployment, there's a lot of the people who, one of the reasons I was happy to go was I knew I'm going to be working or meeting people who've been there. So if I'd been there, if they talked about poppies or echoes, I knew what they were talking about.
Right, okay.
Because I'd been there too.
Yes.
So
now
we had that connection to start with.
That's right. Now you mentioned while you were there, you were experiencing the understanding of 5 people that had been killed. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Well, one was an IED. The worst one was the 3 who were killed at Sauk Bed. And one of those was he and his twin were both deployed, identical twins. And without, I came in when he found out. And for whatever reason, it was 8 hours before we could get the word back that he could contact his parents, because when something happened, all the comms would be cut until everybody in Australia who needed to be told had been told.
Yes.
To prevent rumours and such. So there he is with his friends, and he's sitting there going, how the hell do I tell him? Am I allowed to say that on the radio?
Yeah.
Do I tell my mum I've lost my little brother?
Of course,
was
you'd be asking.
hell on earth for them.
How do I... And of course, there's no answer to that question.
No, of course
you just
not.
let him speak.
They're in shock.
So you just let him speak and let him know that you're listening.
Did you have any supports for you in your role? And was there enough support for your role?
Well, the Archbishop rang several times to make sure I was okay after things had happened. I had regular emails from parishioners and friends.
And lollies.
And lollies, which I didn't eat, I handed out. It's amazing what you can get from the Americans for a packet of Tim Tams.
Did you have a nickname?
I was just the iPod Padre.
Okay.
Because I sort of learned how to use an iPod, and I discovered an app which took the role of 8 books. So I'm sitting there thinking, do I take 8 books or this?
Good reading.
It was a very easy decision. So I got nicknamed the iPod Padre.
The love that is shown in that situation, it's when somebody's in absolute crisis and grief, and we know that from road accident situations with families, in sporting complex circumstances where a family member dies within a sporting community and chaplains are called in. 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins.
Yeah.
And I like that extra word in there, deeply. And I think that's the word that makes that whole verse, don't you? The word deeply, because I think that to give your time is one thing, but to give your life into, say, somebody else is a deep form of love. And I think that's what you probably were exercising with those men over that.
And women.
And women, yeah. And with those in your own congregation. It's, in a sense, the person who can be maligned and criticised. And I find that sad in our world today, that quite often the pictures within movies and films and within the general life is to malign the Christian minister, when in actual fact that person is quite often the one that's alongside holding the hand of the widow or the couple that have lost a young child or are called in at the most devastating of crises of circumstances like a war in Afghanistan. They're the men and women that are often at a police situation where police are being counselled afterwards by a chaplain and armed services or police chaplain. I think that's the part that we want to, even on our Sunday service, to convey this morning, that the goodness of God is amongst many of his people, and the good things that are going out into our community. Quite often, like the First Peter here, the Apostle Peter, who was with Jesus, says, again, I'll read the words, above all, love each other deeply, because love overcomes a multitude of sins. You're on the Sunday service. We're back here on the Sunday service. Our guest today, Mark Sexton, one of our local ministers in the Barossa Valley. He has 8 churches, actually, so he's a very busy man.
Busy.
He's worn out, actually, but he's here this morning with us, and we've been talking about some of his work, but I want to go back to your local church. I mean, are we seeing, apart from the fact of you being very busy working amongst people with issues and so forth, what are some of the more real problems that we're seeing with this inflation, rising costs of living, people struggling in marriage breakdowns and family breakdown, even domestic violence and so forth? Are we seeing those problems in the local church and in your local community?
I haven't in myself, but a big problem is housing, a massive problem. In one of my communities, there were 6 families who had to go and find new rentals because the contract had come up and the people who owned the property were looking to increase the rental.
Right, and they can't afford it.
They couldn't afford it. So that's 6 in a small community. I was told by one real estate agent in the Barossa, I think a while back, that there's a grand total across the entire Barossa Valley, 7 rentals available for residential.
25,000 people, but just 7 properties to rent.
Yeah. So housing's a massive issue, and housing affordability.
Is the council prepared to sort of look at other options there, like perhaps, I don't know, caravan parks and all that sort of thing?
You'd have to talk to the council about that. Not my call.
Oh, okay.
But you work in that where people clothing. I mean, are we seeing where I know that there are many different missions, Salvation Army, St Vincent de Paul, and so forth, that are U-Care, I think, and I think the Anglicans have got one too. So Anglicare, I think they're all talking about a huge amount of winter clothing, rugs, and things like that. You take
food,
for granted, even food. Yeah,
food.
Is that something we're seeing in local churches?
Yes. Some years ago, the various churches divided up the state so they wouldn't duplicate.
Yes.
And so, for example, logically in the Barossa Valley, Lutheran Care coordinate all of that. And we just last month we had a bit where we were doing a food drive so they could put together food parcels for people in the valley. So even just being able to afford food for some people is becoming a big, big problem.
And how does that affect you in, say, do you get calls from, say, somebody within your congregation that says, hey, look, we've got some folk that we know that they've got some really strategic issues, and do you then organise, is a lot of your work then the time taken to get somebody to come and provide service, is that something that you become a coordinator and in a sense ministry time and counselling time could be lost because you're actually involved in the practical all the time?
Well, if they're hungry,
you feed them as Jesus would have done.
So generally what I do in the Barossa is I handball them to the Lutheran Care because they're the people who've got the expertise and the resources and such. And of course we support that, with that food drive, and in Christmas, both Barossa and Kapunda, we have a Christmas tree set up that people put in presents, so that can go out to those who otherwise will not get anything.
And the demographics that are needing this kind of support, would you say they're kind of more families, that they're obviously spending, a lot of money on their children and they haven't got much left for the food?
That's my take on it, as far as I can work out. It's the families. If they've got a rental, the price of rent. If they've not got a steady job, looking for work, just the sheer expenses of doing that, and the time involved, and then school. I mean, there's a reason why there's a breakfast club in a couple of the schools in the Barossa Valley. There's this perception that there's no poverty in the Barossa Valley, but there is.
Is there homelessness too? Is there people sleeping in cars? I mean, doing it tough?
I have heard that there are.
Yeah.
I haven't personally seen it, but I have heard there are,
In James, the writer, I think James, my church history and my memory's correct, was James the brother of Jesus? James, or is this the other James who was a disciple?
There are two Jameses.
Yes.
There's James, who's the brother of John, sons of Alphaeus. And then there's James, who's referred to as the brother of the Lord, who led the community in Jerusalem after the crucifixion. But the Greek that's used could also mean cousin. It's like some Aboriginal languages, I'm told, the word for father is used for every male of that generation, because they're all meant to be your father. So it's...
Yeah, interesting. Well, James, the writer in the Bible, who could be a relative or could be a disciple of Jesus, 1 verse 27, he says that true religion that God our Father accepts is where one, in a pure and faultless way, looks after orphans and widows in their distress and keeps oneself from being polluted by the world or by the world around about. It's an interesting passage there, isn't it?
In this case, that's James, son of Alphaeus, the brother of John.
There we have it. Thank you for a bit of church history, but the importance of that verse, from what you've just said about helping people in need, it is something that quite often people say, oh, well, he's religious because he helps people or whatever, but it actually is a part of our desire to follow what Christ's example was.
And it's more than being a do-gooder. It's a do-gooder, you do it to feel better.
It's a bit like virtual signalling or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. But if we're doing it properly, it is an expression of love for that person.
Pure and faultless, as James says,
And very important, they're polluted by the world there. He's talking about the world's attitudes, not being aware of it.
Not rubbish on the street pollution. He's talking definitely there about how our hearts can not be, or in this case, he's talking about being defiled, isn't he, by something. So, isn't it interesting that there is an example, an outpouring of love that we can show to each other, and maybe to conclude today, it could just be that if we, those that do follow Christ, that are, as you were talking about, having people come in so that you can disciple or set an example to them, if we were to continue to do that, maybe that Church Life survey or that census survey that came recently, maybe the numbers could be reversed, Mark?
It's happened in the past. In the 19th century, there was a very small percentage of the world, actually, the English-speaking world, went to church.
Yes.
There's a story of Booth, who founded the Salvation Army, talking to a man running a barrow in the St. Paul's churchyard in London. And he asked him, had he ever been inside the church? The man looked at him and said, what church? Now, his father had that barrow. His grandfather had that barrow. That's spot in the market. He had never been inside St. Paul's church. He didn't even know it was a church.
No.
So the last part of the 19th century, first part of the 20th century, where there were relatively high church attendances, that's a bit of a standout in Christian history. There's been lots of times when...
The revivals, they call them, don't they?
And often it is in conjunction with the backdrop of, unfortunately, war, and that is unfortunate, that is what it does do. It actually brings you to that point of, why are we here? What are we doing? Is there a God? All of that.
And you're saying there about caring orphans and widows. It's worth bearing in mind that the English word charity actually comes from the Latin word caritas, which is one of the several words the Romans had to describe love. So it means love.
Yeah, the charity of giving, the loving of others that just don't have the resources. It is a very important point to make on our Sunday service. It's been great to have local priest from the Barossa parish. He's been good enough to give us his time, and he's very, very worn out too. So I do thank you for staying with us for this time this morning. Mark Sexton, we look forward to having you again and also chatting to you more another time.
Thank you very much.
And you're on the Sunday service. Our topic today has been the ministry in the local church, and Mark Sexton joined us, and a really great reflection on his work, not only locally in one of our town regions, or a number of them actually, he's across 8 churches, Lisa, but also in his work with the chaplaincy with the armed services in Afghanistan. Love became a topic. It's tough to love in the situation that one can be in, but greater love has no man than one that lays down his life for his friends became a theme that came out of Mark being with us today.
It certainly isn't an easy process to do that, Wayne. I mean, you can sort of say it, it's easy to roll it off your tongue, but to actually do it, it can be very challenging. And I think it helps to challenge ourselves personally. What are we doing that we can do to be able to respond to people in need around the communities that we're in? And really, it's all about loving our neighbour as ourselves. And when you think about the Corinthians 13 passage at the end there, it talks about love bears all things, hopes all things, endures all things, and love never fails. And of course, love covers over a multitude of sins. And so we here at The Flow, we want to be able to convey that to you today.
Yes, that's our Sunday service topic, and great to have the priest from the local congregation, Mark Sexton, with us today. And I look forward to your company, along with yours, Lisa, when we do this all again next Sunday morning.